Great panelist time to speak. So I'm going to introduce Stephanie she's given me the permission to say WURD and not W-U-R-D. So let me just give you a little background on Stephanie. That our moderator for today's panel discussion is Stephanie Renee, who's a resident arts and culture expert at WURD Radio 96.1 and 900 AM in Philadelphia, where she hosts the Friday edition of The Source. And in addition to her online duties, Stephanie hosts a series of behind-the-scenes video features titled WURD Backstage, where she speaks to local talents and artists who have brought their latest productions to Philadelphia venues. So please join me in welcoming Stephanie, who will then introduce our panelists. Stephanie.
Thank you, Arthur, and good afternoon, my tribe here in Philadelphia. This is officially feeling like we are at a family reunion and we're sharing in really great data with one another, hopefully with the end benefit being that we're all going to be able to grow from being here this afternoon, hearing this information and sharing it with our respective organizations. And so what I'd like to do is to have my panelists come up and I'll introduce them individually based on the way they sit. Normally, I would love to be in one of these beautiful leather chairs along with them, but because of our microphone situation, I will be more formally standing here at the podium for our conversation. So we will begin to my left, your right, with Robert Blackson, who is the director of Temple Contemporary at Temple University's Tyler School of Art. Temple Contemporary is a research and public programs initiative whose mission is to reimagine the social function of art. The singular purpose foregrounds curatorial accountability, reciprocity, and exchange as the basis of Temple Contemporary's social life and, by extension, of our social values. Please put your hands together for Robert. To his left is Ryan Lewis. With over 15 years of professional experience in the opera industry, Ryan Lewis joined Opera Philadelphia in October 2012 and currently serves as the Vice President of Marketing. And he's playing hooky today because they're going to be announcing their season tomorrow. So the rest of his staff is working on that right now. He's responsible for planning and executing multi-channel advertising and sales campaigns, as well as leading consumer research and guest experience initiatives. Next, we have Patricia Wilson Aden, who brings over 2 decades of experience as a senior executive in nonprofit management to her position as president and CEO at the African American Museum in Philadelphia. AMP, as it is known, engages diverse communities in appreciating the Black experience through the narratives of art, culture, and history. And last but not least, Youngmoo Kim is the director of the Expressive and Creative Interaction Technologies, or EXCITE Center, and a professor of electrical and computer engineering at Drexel University. His research group, the Music and Entertainment Technology Laboratory, or METLab, pursues transdisciplinary activities at the convergence of technology and creative expression and the advancement of arts-integrated learning in science and engineering, including machine understanding of sound, robotics for expressive interaction, and K-12 outreach, and I'm so glad you included the A, for STEAM education. And so, with all of that wonderful statistical data, and really thank you for that as a backdrop, because our conversation, our panel, is supposed to engage around the notion of non-traditional venues and programming. And this is something that I feel that I represent on the air all the time and as a matter of being, because I'm one of those people who has always bristled at the notion that Black, not of Hispanic origin, does not pertain to my family. And so statistically, people don't necessarily count me. There are folks who, growing up in 70s DC, when it was affectionately known as Chocolate City, who, don't understand the kind of cultural background, the ethnic background, the world that I lived in, because many major cities and small towns in the U.S. Look nothing like the world that I grew up in. And so the idea of finding audience and how your respective organizations are doing that and building some of the loyalties and support that the statistics that we've just finished seeing are incredibly important for how we move forward and will be beneficial to everyone in the room. So the first question I want to ask is about, to which choir are you preaching? When you think about your initiatives, your organizations, how you all are presenting in the present, what is your core audience, or who is your core audience?
Shall I jump in?
Yes.
Well, our core audience at the African American Museum is expressed right in our mission statement. We talk about celebrating the Black experience. So our core audience are Black people and those who appreciate Black heritage. We decided to stake our claim unequivocally in that area. Previously, we were not ambivalent, but we used words that were not as definitive or strongly definite. But we feel that if we are to be authentic in that space and true to ourselves, and in being true to ourselves, being more attractive then to this audience that we desire, we have to state in an emphatic way that our core audience is those people who are interested in, connected to, and celebrate the Black experience.
I'll jump in to say that for the work that we do at Temple Contemporary, we kind of follow this ethos that if you design something for everyone, then no one will come. And in relation to that, when we do our projects and our programs, either in particular communities or directly in the gallery space, it's always with a very particular audience in mind. And that takes often a lot of care and consideration and collaboration and cooperation in terms of the ways in which we can build something with others that will be meaningful for both ourselves and for the people that we're working with. And so that is the way in which oftentimes our audiences are quite granular, and we do a lot of various different programs, but it's through that sort of micro approach that we're able to, I wouldn't say generate massive audiences, but meaningful audiences.
At Opera Philadelphia, we believe that opera is open to all, and that opera stems from the human voice, which all of us have. Some of us can sing better than others, but there's something in there that it's that nature of that voice coming from the human spirit, and that we tell stories, and there's different stories that connect different people to those, operas. So that's why we try to provide a wide variety of programming that connects different people together.
So the Excite Center is not a cultural institution per se, but I'll answer your question in two ways. So of course, there's our core student audience. The people, the Drexel students and others from other institutions who come together because they have this shared interest in intersecting technology with creative expression. One of the things that was brought up in the presentation earlier that really resonated is that our students are really looking for those truly authentic experiences. It's never technology for its own sake. We don't build something cool just to throw it in front of people. It has to be on the surface of something. And then the second part of my answer is that when we do performances or events or collaborate with other artists and cultural institutions, we are seeking that, again, that broader audience of folks who might have an interest because there's technology involved, but then to try to showcase how that technology really can enhance virtuosity. That it's not, again, the technology is never the star. It's always about expanding the notions of human creative expression.
When it comes to funding, one of the things that we've just seen is that this idea of creating experience and having social impact becomes incredibly important. And I wonder that whether you are connected to an Institute of Higher Learning or just as a presenting organization, if you have recently conducted surveying of your current base that has helped to transform your approach to what you are presenting now and what you're looking to present next season, the next few seasons, as or semesters, as things continue to evolve? Have you recently undertaken some of that research to better define who you're speaking to and how?
I'll start. Yes, I've been working on 5 years of significant research studies now. Started back in the 13-14 season, and we needed a better understanding of who our audience was and what were their motivations for coming to the opera. And we really learned a lot. And again, it ties very closely into what we saw earlier today, is that it's not a transactional, it's more about the relationship that the customer has and how they feel opera fits in their life and how much they'd like to see. So we, after understanding our audience that was not subscribing in the same way, many were coming less frequently as single ticket buyers, we undertook a contextual segmentation study where we actually divided our audience into 8 different segments that rolled up into 2 super segments, what we call opera buffs and opera attenders. And so it goes beyond demographics and looks at psychographics, demographics, what's their attitude about what they feel about it, how much opera do they need in their lives. And then we've developed a whole strategy around how we present and package and communicate with those audience segments. So one of the examples that you probably have all heard of is we wanted to test the idea of what would an opera festival look and feel like in Philadelphia? And how could we present opera in a different way that might attract new audiences? And we actually tested that hypothesis through several years of research studies over and over, and eventually we beta tested a small festival in the fall of 2016, and then last fall we launched 017 for the very first time. And as you probably heard, we were in 6 different venues across the city of Philadelphia for a 12-day period with more than 30 performances. And it really, I think, set the bar for what opera could be like in the future and brought audiences together not only in Philadelphia but from outside our market as well. And that all came from research.
Excellent. Anyone else?
Sure. I mean, again, speaking more towards student research or student-oriented research, we have certainly observed a greater and greater demand for programs, interdisciplinary programs that are not just simply one thing. Hey, I want to learn about computers and visual arts. I want to learn about music and technology, right? And the traditional academic silos don't allow for that. So we have undertaken research, I mean, our center itself, and then in combination with our enrollment management division at the university, looking at that. And yes, the highest growing, not just demand of student fields, but the highest growing area in workforce areas are, of course, in design areas, in expressive skills with some technology. And so we do see a trend here that not only can we create programs that appeal to this growing demographic of students, but that there are then future careers for them as well. So we are trying to craft those programs as we speak.
Yes.
So this idea of data collection around audience is really a challenge for us. It's very immediate. It's something that we are attempting to address right now. But we're trying to line that up with the direction of the museum. As the African American Museum has reimagined itself, we've talked about some values, and those values line up with some of the things that were highlighted in the presentation. Things such as being transformational as far as impacting people's lives, the idea of empathy, and the idea of educating the public. So these are soft values. And so what we are struggling with right now is how do we find the metrics, the appropriate metrics for measuring impact around these soft values. So I can't say that we know the answer. I can't say that we've gone through the study. We're still struggling with transferring these soft qualities, these virtues, we believe that they're virtues, into the measured outcomes that some of the funders are looking for.
And for a lot of our work with Temple Contemporary, many of the initiatives that we undertake are really done in the sense of a conversation. And so there's no real sense of when it might end, because it's really dependent on the ways in which the publics are interacting with those discussions and those initiatives. And so for our work, it's been very interesting to see the ways in which some ideas have continued to grow and grow and grow. We almost have to keep up. And in other ways, it's sort of like, okay, so this is becoming less of a social dynamic and less of an interest across the city, and we need to change tack in response to that. So for us, it's very much about response and then re-engagement.
Well, while you're in that space, let's continue with that, because I wonder for each of you, how difficult is it to redirect the ship? How difficult is it to steer? Because as you collect data, as you think about the changing dynamics of the patronage here in the city compared to other places and what have you, as you recognize that a wave is coming and you're trying to surf on top of it, how mobile can your organizations be to address those changing dynamics?
Right. We're pretty light. I mean, I have a staff of 2 others. So we can move the ship pretty quickly. And that's actually a great asset for us. And it's been a lot of fun because it's meant that as the social dynamic does change, we need to change with it or even try to get in front of that curve. It's been a wild ride. And so I would say for us at Temple Contemporary, that's been one of the most joyous parts about it, is that we can rip it up and start something else and see how we're going to go with that. So that's been quite good. That's been quite fun.
And I would say for us, some of our company values are being nimble and flexible and being able to adapt based on the information that we're getting. And every time we went through an entire session of research, we'd only want to ask more questions, and that would change our future course. So in opera, it's difficult because if you want the best singers and the best directors on the planet, you have to book those people 4 or 5 years out in advance. Mm-hmm. So a lot of our planning has to be backed up way before that, but allowing the culture and the people to be able to work in a flexible environment sets us up for success in the future.
So being nimble does not necessarily align with being a 40-year-old organization or 40-year-old museum. But I have to say that we are embracing change at the museum. One of our definers right now is reimagine. We are saying we are reimagining the museum. And it's an adventure, and it's an adventure that I personally am very excited about. The staff feels very strongly that they are part of a very important change. Our challenge is finding leaders at the board level that are as excited about this change. So there's a dialogue going on internally and externally and within the leadership of the board and the leadership of the staff saying, what does this all mean? And it is churning right now.
I guess I'll respond by saying sometimes you steer the ship and sometimes the ship steers you. Right? And so as a center within a larger institution like a university, of course, we, and sort of being on the cutting edge of technology and the intersection with creative expression, we pride ourselves in being nimble and trying to take on new things and steer new directions. It is great to have data like the study just presented by Arthur and Clara. I mean, just amazing, amazing stuff. But it also raises so many other questions that we don't know the answers to and don't have the data on. And so a lot of times we just have to make a case or make our best, have from our experiences in these worlds and having some depth of experience, both in the cultural sector and in the technology world, make our best estimate of where the future is going. And sometimes that aligns very, very well with the forces that are happening at our institution across the city, like right now with the demographics of the city getting younger, more and more younger people staying here, more and more entrepreneurship, a greater emphasis on cultural experiences and technology. Those are all trends that are coming together. But again, sometimes there are many people who don't see it that way, and so making a strong case for that.
So what you just mentioned brings up a great point about an evolving Philadelphia. And I think one of the challenges, not being a native-born Philadelphian, but adopting Philly as my second home, one of the things that Philly has struggled with in the, kind of the opinion of this outsider and people that I've discussed this with, is juxtaposing the idea of the provincial, being neighborhood-based, being generations deep, people who were born and raised here and love to stay here and stake claim to community and spaces, is managing the evolution of what a younger demographic, of what a more tech-based demographic might be demanding of their experiences here. So for each of you, how challenging or inviting is a sense of place in the way that you all engage with audiences? Because there are the folks that like to know they're walking in this door and they know exactly what they're going to get, and then some people who want to be dazed and amazed.
If I can jump in, place is everything to us. Place is core to our identity as an institution. Our president, John Fry, has put a stake in the ground and says, Drexel University is going to be the most civically engaged university in the country. Right? We see ourselves as part and parcel with this city. We are an anchor institution in the city, and as goes the city, so shall we. So all of our efforts, whether they're around culture and technology, or whether they're around community engagement, education, space development, placemaking, of course, all the development that's happening right in this vicinity and around University City, those are all aligned. We don't see those as separate things. So, and again, not everyone sees them all at the same time,
Right.
But I think having that strategic focus, that vision, that place is a core part of this, experience is a core part of this, technology and people are a core part of this. These are inextricably linked. I think that that is, that's what's powering our institution forward, and we hope to stay on that track as long as it'll take us. Yeah.
So place is one of our priorities right now. As we expressed our core values, getting outside of the four walls of the museum and not thinking of ourselves necessarily in a bricks and mortar way has really been one of our primary objectives. Thus, we have entered into a relationship with Art Sanctuary, so we have a presence at 16th and Bainbridge. We have entered into a relationship with the Rush Philanthropic Arts Foundation in the Logan neighborhood and placed our new residency program in that neighborhood. We want the African American Museum to have an imprint throughout the city. And while we always will envision our core programming going on within the museum, we believe that place and valuing neighborhood presence will give us a relationship with a constituency, a broader constituency than ever before.
Go ahead.
I gotta say, I'm kind of stuck on this one because I'm not really sure which way to take it. We're located inside Temple University, inside the Tyler School of Art, and that is its own sort of building landed from Mars as the Tyler into this neighborhood. And more for us, it's about how we can communicate a sense of emotion and authenticity, obviously, and a sense of connection to a place where our programs truly belong. And they don't always belong at Tyler or at Temple. And there needs, for us, there needs to be that relationship with, in many times, another place where things actually do belong and should be taken care of. And that's how we define place. It's about where that heart should be beating and then finding that pulse with the others.
And we believe that Philadelphia is at the intersection of sophistication and grit. And we kind of feel like Philadelphia has a personality. You like that? Philly has a personality, and we feel like that's part of our DNA, that's part of our brand, that's who we are. So how can we take opera from outside of the traditional opera house and bring it into the city? So that was actually what we wanted to do with Festival O, was make the city of Philadelphia a great stage for opera and bring it out into the people. And try non-traditional spaces like a warehouse or showing a broadcast on Independence Mall to really bring opera to the people and make them feel like they are part of it.
There is a boundary that one of my good buddies, DJ Rich Medina, talks about also in the way that culture, in its broadest notion, is presented in the American space as opposed to abroad, whether we're talking about accessibility or whether we're just talking about the way that we are raised to feel a sense of belonging to the way that things are presented. So as we continue to ponder about non-traditional in this conversation today, I wonder if with each of your respective programs and institutions, if you feel that we've already hit the wall or we are still traveling at warp speed towards the wall of what we have seen happen in our educational system. Because there was a time when, the pre-war, thank you, pre-war folks talk about music appreciation in schools. So that even if you weren't the talented child in any particular discipline, you had an opportunity within the context of our public education to grasp onto things and be introduced to things that made you more culturally sensitive and aware. And we know that Philadelphia has had that struggle, but it's an American struggle about how much our children are exposed to and how that gives them access and a sense of belonging to what each of your respective organizations presents and contributes to Philadelphia's culture. So have we already hit the wall where we're now trying to surpass that level of disconnection perhaps? Or are we still kind of moving in that direction where this dilemma is going to be much more widespread in the cultural community?
I think this dilemma is huge. I mean, speaking from the Tyler School of Arts perspective, the kids who aren't understanding an appreciation of art and aren't having that dexterity with the hand to know how to draw or to sculpt or to use technology in certain ways for creative purposes, those kids, it doesn't even seem natural to even think about art school as a place to go. And so we are seeing, just looking demographically, we're looking at a huge drop potentially because the students just don't have that awareness towards the creative aspects of their life to want to engage in that future possibility. So I think we're already seeing it at that young age that there's going to be huge ramifications down the road. Yeah.
It's so important to expose young people to the arts at a young age, and that's why we try to seek out funding to bring students from the school district of Philadelphia, pay for their buses, bring them to a final dress rehearsal, or go to the classroom, bring in a docent, talk about the opera. It's so incredibly important not only to experience culture, but also to learn that there might be a future in it for anyone in that room, either as a performer or perhaps you could work backstage. So one thing that we're testing right now is a workforce readiness pilot program, where we're inviting kids to come in and to work with our local union to see what it might look like to work backstage in an opera house, and bringing kids in and just seeing that there are job possibilities here. So that's something that we're investigating right now that I think would be very attractive to someone looking for a future career in the arts.
So for us, we think that there's still a long ways to go. There's still a lot of work to be done, and for us, it's all about relevancy, especially in the history space. Our mission is broad. We talk about art, history, and culture. But to make connections with children around history, past is prologue, but helping kids understand that connection is huge. It's absolutely this huge divide. So we try to tease out those themes of history that remain relevant, so we can talk about things such as freedom and liberty and protest and revolution in ways that make a Caddo relevant to Black Lives Matter. We were talking and we were laughing amongst ourselves and saying that, some of these younger kids, teenagers, believe that they invented revolution. And you don't have to go back so far. Cecil B. Moore was a crazy man, he was about revolution. But having this kid from North Philadelphia understand that connection and then go back another generation and make, again, that connection of these are folks who were about change and pushing boundaries and proclaiming in in-your-face ways that we have rights and there should be equity in communities and things. That's our job. It's tough, but we're unapologetic about making that journey.
I am certainly concerned about the reduction in cultural exposure in public education, absolutely. But I don't see it as a wall. I see it as more of a long, winding path or a long arc. And let's not forget, I mean, education itself is part of culture. And education also must evolve and adapt as culture changes as well. So I think, part of it is that we can't expect, that your music appreciation class should be the same as it was 30 years ago, because of course, many, many things have changed since then. But I also am very, very optimistic about the future because we do work with a lot of young people. And just sort of echoing what Patricia just said, there is tremendous creativity, insight, motivation among all the young people that we work with. One of the small ways we try to tap into that is we have programs that, of course, STEAM programs that integrate technology with creative expression. So we just had a group of middle school kids from West Philadelphia, from the Promise Zone here, who spent 8 weeks with us, 1 hour a week, building little musical robots. Small robots, and they didn't have any programming experience or engineering experience. But because we put it in the context, hey, we're going to do something creative. You're going to build, and then at the end of this, you're going to perform with it. You're going to write a little song. You're going to do a little rap. You're going to use this as your backing band, right? And they all rose to the occasion. They built little tambourine hitting things, a xylophone, self-playing xylophone, really, really cool stuff. And these are 11 and 12-year-old kids. Yeah. So if you can tap into that and bring it into a context of relevance, that makes me very, very optimistic for the future.
What you just said brought up a great point as well, whether you all see it as an open invitation and an open door, or whether it's a challenge in terms of cultural organizations adapting to our modern era, about how perhaps gooey some people might think that culture is becoming, right? More, there used to be a time where there was specificity in various areas of study or disciplines, and now more and more things are multidisciplinary. So the way that robotics comes together with music in the program that you just described, is that brave new frontier, or is that still, a way for organizations, a challenge for people to be able to adapt and be able to reimagine the way that they interact with the public?
So the short answer is it's both old and new, right? Think about Leonardo da Vinci. Think about Pythagoras, or going back to the ancient Greeks. The ancient Greeks didn't have just separate disciplines for mathematics and music. They were one discipline, right? And astronomy, that was all one discipline there. So in some ways, it's, I think, the natural reaction to our systems or institutions that become far too siloed, where you become hyper-specialized in one thing and then reduce your exposure to other things. I think it's partially that. I think that offering, again, more pathways. As human beings, we like to put things in boxes. We like to say, oh yeah, that belongs over here and that belongs over here. We like those, sort of mentally that's nice for us. But we're realizing more and more, through all sorts of research, whether it's academic disciplines, whether it is interest, certainly whether it is gender, whether it's ethnicity, there are not very, very clear lines between things. There are spectra. Right? And I think we need to embrace that. As academics, as researchers, as people, and to provide those opportunities to explore those intersections, because that's where the cool stuff is. It is at the intersection. Steve Jobs gets quoted far too often, but he was brilliant in saying that what it is, it's the intersection of technology and the liberal arts. Right? That's what makes something like the iPhone something that's going to change the world. We are addicted to these things now. They are part of ourselves. But part of it is because it was designed by people who understood humans, who understood human interaction, how to engage with real people, not just technologists.
So he's quoting Steve Jobs. I'll quote Robin Thicke. We like blurred lines, right? It is part of our DNA as an institution, and it is even more so now. As I said, our mission is arts, history, and culture. It used to be art, history, culture.
Right.
Now it's art, history, and culture. It's all sort of mixed in together. And I will say we've always been comfortable with those blurred lines. We've always been comfortable with that very broad mission. Where we found challenge was from the funding community who said, that's really a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Can you do art, history, and culture well? Don't you need to define and refine and narrow what you're doing to one segment? I'm pleased to say that maybe the funding community has caught up with us, and now there is more acceptance of that broader mission, those blurred lines.
I don't know that I have anything else to add at this point.
I gotta say, that's the fun part. It's not a challenge at all. That's where the juice is. When you get, as we do in our committees and different things, you get people from all different walks of life and experiences. And when those questions start to combine and come together, then you see the joy in it. So yeah, that's what I've been most attracted to. Really, my time in Philly is that I see that kind of flexibility coming into conversation.
Excellent. Well, I want to, can we just take a moment right now to thank our panel for their wonderful responses? Being mindful of time between our panelists and our wonderful presenters from LaPlaca Cohen. If you all have questions, we'd like to give you an opportunity to ask those now. Raise your hand and the mic will come to you.
Hi, I wanted to ask a question regarding metrics, right? So AMP made the really great point of, soft goals, right? And that's a lot of what we're going through right now in many of our organizations, transformative and so forth and so on. So I wanted to ask the team, if you had any suggestions, if you had any kind of, from all your statistical, wonderful background, like some avenues we can follow to, find metrics for these soft goals.
Sure. I think there's a lot of stuff out there already. Again, I refer to that report that I think identifies categorically what some of these emerging soft metrics are. And I think many of them are contained within this whole notion of an SROI, because that leads to, I can think, call it a broader runway. So in addition to the metrics that have historically been those that cultural organizations have been asked to produce, there is a reassessment going on right now. In fact, we're just about to start a project with one of the 5 great museums in the country, let's call them. And the project is predicated on an assumption that we will never win the game of the congressional hearing about where is the return for the money we gave you that we can compare to all these other things, right? That's not how culture rolls. But it does roll in a way that can be deeply meaningful. Carla referred to, I think, a lot of these kind of areas, these areas that have not yet been metricized because we've been afraid of them, because they seem too soft. I think part of it comes with working with people like Pew and other enlightened funders and collectively identifying what metrics are authentic to you and measurable, whether they be qualitative or quantitative, and then finding other individuals in addition to foundations who might support such endeavors. One of the things we're starting to see is this is happening with bigger organizations, but I'm super excited that it might be a best practice for the future, which is creating cultural venture capital departments within cultural organizations, where the whole idea is you get to attract a kind of person who likes the chase and is willing to take a risk knowing that you may or may not win with that particular return on the investment, but that you will absolutely advance the organization, like all these great organizations. You'll move it forward because we'll agree that one of the metrics is going to be the process itself. And the process will yield with it an ability to learn certain things. And those become metrics of success, not just outcome metrics, but process metrics. So I think this expands in a lot of really interesting ways, and I think that looking at that study that we referred to and talking to some other people who are doing some work here now, I think it's happening. So that's the beginning of a conversation that I'm sure is much longer than we have time for today.
Other questions? Hands up and the mic will come to you.
Hi, this is really a question for, feels very strange talking to you in the mic right here.
What do you have to say, Julie?
It's for Arthur
When we have dinner tonight, I want us to bring our microphones.
This is for Arthur and Carla, and I was very taken by how you're contextualizing this study about being in the circumstances that we now find ourselves in. And this sort of awakening of empathy, do you think that's here for a while?
I have a lot of strong feelings about this. I think that one of the things we have to acknowledge is that for every force or trend, there's a counterforce and countertrend. And there's a very human need right now. Carla, I think, gave it some great voice, and I'll give you a chance to weigh in on this, to say that that stasis that seems to be the picture of this country that we hear through the media every morning that demoralizes so many of us, that is an aspect of society, but that's not who a lot of people think we are, and that's not where it doesn't give the room that I think culture and other areas do to look at the opportunities in this moment. There have been some interesting editorials recently, and I forget whether it was Charlie Blow or something in the New York Times, about if you just look quantitatively, and maybe you guys are tracking this over at Drexel, the number of amazing things that are happening that get overshadowed by the rhetoric and the noise in this moment are astounding. The rate of change, the rate of improvement, the rate of societal improvement, the reduction in just the number of conflicts around the world relative to what these things had been historically. And there is something that a lot of people want to find reason either to celebrate or to invest in or to be empathic around that I think is very core to who we are as people, that doesn't get overshadowed in areas like this. And some people are even more motivated because they feel they are more threatened in a moment like this. Do you want to add anything to this?
Sure. I think tied up in this, too, is a concept that we talk about of threshold fear. The idea of just even aesthetically walking up to many of our cultural organizations and feeling the weight of its power and authority. And so the idea of empathy and really welcoming in and throwing one's doors wide open is an antidote to that. And part of the reason why opera, for instance, more traditional operas than Opera Philadelphia, of course, but is considered less now of being a part of the culture. And considered less to be culture than some of those more traditionally lower, and that high-low has begun to blur, partly because people are just not interested anymore in that authority and that voice of power and want to be partners as audience members.
So I've just been reading something called the Edelman Trust Barometer, which indicates that trust is at an all-time low throughout the world, not just in the US. And within the institutions that they study, I think culture probably falls under the NGOs, which does pretty well. But I'd love to hear you comment a little bit on, you know, especially for the larger institutions, how this lack of trust in government, in lots and lots of big institutions, how does that correlate with the kinds of research you've done?
Do you guys know this study? So essentially it looks at how the public thinks about different sectors of society. So the lowest right now is government and the public sector, that the trust levels around that have dropped precipitously. Big surprise. The press is, media I think is number 3 actually. Culture has not decreased in that study, first off.
So when they say NGOs, they don't incorporate?
No. Cultural institutions, nor do it have institutions of higher learning decreased in that study. So I think we have to look at that thing in a more nuanced way to understand that, there is a lot of reasons, perhaps fed by media, public official rhetoric, to feel concern about institutions that were previously held in higher esteem. But what's nice is that there are a lot of pockets of things that people continue to trust on. And I would say, looking at it from a competitive standpoint, as a cultural institution, you're a port in a storm right now, and there are opportunities inherent in that because of the upheaval around you. So I kind of see it as a little more glass half full for the people in this room at least.
In the back.
Hi, thank you. I'm interested in the metrics that you're talking about, this idea of finding new metrics. Can you give us a few more examples of the type of metrics that we might be looking at to prove this social return on investment?
Sure. Again, I encourage you to look at this study, the Giving Code, which lists a number of them and I think has linked resources on the electronic version. But among these things are, number of lives touched, number of people, number of kids in kids programs who bring family members back to the organization after an initial encounter, kind of long tail metrics that show that by making an initial connection, there is a continued benefit in terms of building relationship with either specific types of audience members or broader communities. There's quite a few of them, and I think by listing any, I'm going to leave out some super important ones, other than to say that, you have to find these metrics where you guys live. What are the metrics that are authentic to your organization? And there's things I imagine that a lot of us take for granted and don't maybe yet categorize as metrics because we think they're soft. But the thing is that if they add up to a compelling reason to believe that you guys are really having an impact in the world, then that is an SROI. That is potentially a metric to be tracked and leveraged. Do you guys want to add anything about any metrics that you guys might use that are out of the ordinary?
I'll add one just from a study that we're involved with right now. We're looking at, it's an education study on maker spaces throughout the country, which cross, of course, technology and making in the arts. Well, the indicators that we use a lot of linguistic coding. So it's an ethnographic study, but then having structured interviews to see how often an idea comes up, right, in an interview. And that can be a really strong indicator on many things, including implicit bias as well. We found that there's very strong indications in makerspaces of gender bias, for example. So I'll just point that's another approach that might be useful.
Is there one? One more? Here.
Social return on investment and social impact. So how are we defining these terms right now?
How are you guys defining?
Throw it back at the panel.
I do think it's
for the purposes of the study. How did you define social impact? You've obviously, in some ways, you've prioritized social impact as something that a lot of philanthropists are interested in.
Yeah.
Philanthropy.
If you look online, you'll see all the modules that were clustered that aggregate to what we call social impact. But effectively, it means looking at the organization as a means towards some community-focused end. That the things that you do have some impact on the world around you, and that is acknowledged and rewarded by people who seek that. I guess what we're saying is that the reason it comes up so high is back to this notion of cultural utility. There had been this kind of, in retrospect, charming notion that, about art for art's sake, and we do all these great things, which is completely true, that the artistic exchange, the encounter that the individual has with the object or the moment or the performance, that's the sacred thing. And it's not that that's wrong, but what it's saying now is that it is sacred in what way? To what end, right? By doing that, by bringing people together to experience that, when you get beyond the specificity of the artistic exchange or the art form, what impact might that be having on the world? And sometimes the impact could just be, with Opera Philadelphia creating a festival in all these non-traditional locations, bringing people together who would never have had that opportunity to connect. And they're connecting around an art form, but the social impact they're having is how they feel and how they relate to each other, inspired by or drawn by that art form. Mm-hmm. So it's all these different tentacles that say...
A very wide range of...
Yeah, but through the art, then this, right? And this always has some community connection, okay?
And is our aesthetic experiences incorporated into that?
They are. In one of the charts, and you can look at it again later, but it shows that all those things that we've traditionally held most dear, about the aesthetic moment, the enlightenment, awareness, empowerment, the sense that the artistic exchange takes us somewhere, those are still there, and they're still important. But what's interesting is that in this moment, the top things that people look for relate to what those things then do as social forces. Not that they're not significant, because they're super significant and they have a lot to do with why all of us are in the room today, but that they are amazing means to perhaps an even more important end.
I would add to that we recently did some focus groups of single ticket buyers that came to the festival. And the donation messaging, the reason why to give, is not one size fits all. So for people that just came once, we asked, what organizations do you consider giving to? And it's the ACLU, it's Human Rights Campaign, it's all these other socially minded organizations. So as an arts organization, how do we compete with that? How do we tell the story of the impact that we're trying to make in the community to make a better case for philanthropic support? So that's a challenge I think we're all facing right now.
And one of the things that we see in the report actually details this is that the new philanthropy is actually portfolio philanthropy, so that they will support an arts organization as a part of their investment in things, could be like the ACLU or a bunch of other things, because they believe these are all channels that in aggregate reflect the social impact they want to have on the world, and they view that some arts organizations are perhaps better suited than others to be included in that set. So we're both competing with it, but we're also partnering with them in a new way too, and that's kind of interesting.
Absolutely. We have, I was going to say, yeah.
Well, I had a question, so I don't want to jump ahead of other people with questions, but you can come around to me with a question in a minute.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, while the mic is making its way back to her, why don't you ask your question? Oh, okay.
Sorry. You made a really wonderful point, I thought, about segmentation being a good strategic tool for getting people in the door, but that once people are in the door, it should be in one big room. And I was wondering, I know there must be tons of organizations that have done this well, but I'm wondering if you have any particular examples that you'd like to call to.
Yeah, there are lots of them. And this is my bias. This is not research on my part. And I know that other people can have as strongly held positions on this, but it's something that I've kind of challenged my own assumptions about this. So we work with kind of a small, there's a category of museums called Gilded Age Museums. Anyone know what that is? So that's like the Gardner and the Frick and the Morgan and the Huntington Library and the Walters and all that stuff. So we work with the Gardner, right? And the Gardner has expanded with this, that's the one in Boston. It's expanded with a new building, has a great collection, et cetera. But the Gardner, it turns out, has this secret weapon, which is that it was founded by a woman in an era where women didn't do stuff like that. So what they wound up doing is identifying a variety of communities for whom that woman empowerment message was particularly profound, but they were distinct communities that crossed many different other types of social and behavioral boundaries. And they used targeted media, particularly social media, to invite them all in, and then created this kind of celebration around this where everyone, again, was in the same room. And they believe it was one of the most effective things they've ever done, not just because it was around this perhaps newly resonant idea of an empowered woman, but because it brought together people who didn't think they had these things in common into this great kind of mashup. And I encourage you to reach out to them to get the whole story, because I'm so not doing it justice. But it was the kind of thing when they told us this story about how they felt it was a new paradigm for the kind of gatherings and public events they could do, it was really profound.
Do we have time for more? Okay. Well,
Okay.
I want to give you a chance to get your question.
So I was interested in follow-up to your statement about the Silicon Valley being the philanthropic canary. And I hope I didn't understand that, or perhaps you can explain it to me more, because to me, when I envision the Silicon Valley, when I think of the Silicon Valley, it is not a very diverse place. It is not representative of people like me. And when you think of philanthropy, there are consequences to who isn't in the room. So help me understand that, Steve.
Super fair point. I don't think we were talking about it demographically. I think we're talking about it more generationally, that the generation of new wealth, and I think there's a lot of people in this room who probably deal with new wealth, it seems to be particularly clearly defined in an ecosystem where a lot of people have made money on their own in these very aggressive entrepreneurial ways and are starting to think about philanthropy. Arts is low down on the totem pole. Silicon Valley arts philanthropy is tough, but it is emerging. And it is emerging across different types of people, I would say, although you're right, that sample of people needs to become a lot more like the country as a whole, and they are not there yet. but it's their very habits that we kind of, that make us feel uncomfortable that we need to learn from, right? The fact that they don't view themselves as obligated to yet contribute to society as a whole, but if they do, they want a different role in the relationship of making that contribution. The fact that just like a venture capitalist, they see spreading seed money over a range of different causes because in aggregate, one or two of them will be super effective and they don't mind the risk associated with it because that is similar to the risk that they experienced as they emerged as entrepreneurs. That those mindsets seem to be indicators of the new wealth mindset that will become, we think, perhaps more typical of philanthropy in the future. And also, if culture can make the sale in Silicon Valley, it can make the sale anywhere. That's kind of just the hardcore truth about it right now, and it is only slowly starting to occur. So I went to this talk on last Saturday with Melinda Gates talking about what the Gates Foundation is going to do, and yeah, there's a lot of demographics around that presentation that were troubling, but a lot that were really encouraging because the person she was there with was the Never Again, I always forget, not the Me Too movement, but the woman who's running the LA, the Hollywood-based Time's Up movement, who is brilliant. And they talked about how both of them together believe that this is a moment for not only women's empowerment, but women's philanthropic empowerment too, that through the things they support and hold accountable, there will be an evolution in the way we define what the role of a philanthropist can be. And I thought that was really moving. I hadn't heard that before, and it seemed new to me, and it seemed part of at least what the Gates Foundation role in this all was, saying that, you know, we come from a certain experience, and part of what we've learned in that experience we are transferring to our role as philanthropists. So,
thank you.
But I hear what you're saying, and there's no disagreement about the homogeneity of that pool right now. Absolutely.
And so with that, ladies and gentlemen, I think one of the ways that we can all continue to benefit from today's conversation is that even beyond the cocktail reception, which we'll be beginning momentarily, that we take these conversations not just back to our respective organizations, but back to our communities and continue to question the evolving role of culture in a wonderful city like Philadelphia and in our world, and the role that each of us can play, not competitively, but collectively, in continuing to enhance that. So we want to thank you for coming out today to participate in all of this. Please put your hands together for both our panelists and our presenters from LaPlaca Cohen. And our reception is taking place just beyond the curtain in the back of the room under the China Arch. And so we look forward to continuing the conversation with you there.